Hey guys, what's up? This is my latest review of the new Amazon Prime anthology series, Tales from the Loop. So this is going to be the second episode of the first season. All 8 episodes are up on Amazon Prime now, so free for anyone who subscribes. And this episode is called Transpose, and it's a different director from the first episode. This time it's directed by So Young Kim, so Korean director. Apparently has a few feature films under her belt, so change up here. I actually didn't look at the first director of the first episode, but it's actually a pretty big name because it was Mark Rumack, who, well, in the past has directed like music videos, but he also has done 2 or 3 features. He did 24-Hour Photo, this really creepy voyeuristic thriller with Robin Williams in one of his more obviously edgy type roles, and he also directed Can You Ever Forgive Me, the science fiction movie, which is really good as well. I highly recommend that film to Kerry Mulligan, Keira Knightley, Andrew Garfield. Really interesting dystopian sci-fi movie. So yeah, he directed the first episode, which was notable. Really good direction, as I said. So as you'll know, if you saw the first review, I was mostly positive, and I think the concerns maybe were more with the plot and the characters, and not necessarily that stood out in the first episode. It was more kind of than if all the episodes were, kind of presented or directed like that. And if there was a lack of focus on the characters long term, then it could become a problem. But I'm pleased to say I was really engaged in this episode. They really did some. It was a good conceit, and they really explored it very well. Again, there's probably not that much to talk about plot wise, but it doesn't really matter because the idea of the episode is there, and they kind of get into it really nicely. Couple of nice performances, and it does actually link to the first episode, which I wondered if there would be a thematic link. Obviously, this device of the loop and how it can like explore different like sciences and mysteries. That's going to pop up in every episode in one way or the other. So in this episode, and obviously full spoilers, but the setup is then you have these 2 like good friends in this small town, and they're kind of polar opposites. One of them, Danny, is like really confident, really kind of charming and handsome, and kind of seems to just have a really smooth life. And he is actually the grandson of the Jonathan Pryce character from the first episode, so the guy who runs the loop. And so I think obviously it suggests that he's expected to like just follow in the family line and to go and work for the loop, and that is kind of his future panned out. So in a way, he doesn't have to worry too much about academic results or go into like college or whatever. His future is sort of like mapped out, or that's the expected route. And he has this friend Jacob, who is actually like the older son of the Rebecca Hall character, who we saw in the first episode, and also the Paul Snyder character. So there's another little link, and he's out of the 2 characters, he's the more awkward, kind of shy one, and we see this set up quite nicely in the opening scenes. So we see them like playing music together, and it seems like Danny is like the really confident one, and Jacob is like the more awkward one, who's very modestly just like strumming away on like the bass or something. And particularly with girls, we see then Danny's very popular and is really hitting it off with a girl, and it's kind of hinted at then. Yeah, generally he's very popular with girls, and could, you know, within reason, I guess, have his run of girls. But we also see that Jacob likes this one particular girl and just doesn't know how to approach her, doesn't know how to talk to her and ask her out. And so there's like an awkward like glance in her direction at one point. So yeah, we see that, and there's another like scene of them like weightlifting, and Danny being very much like the kind of like the confident one when it comes to that. But then one day they wander off into the woods, and they come across this crater, this just round like crater, and they're intrigued by it. And so not Danny, sorry. See, this is going to get even more confusing when I tell you what happens. But Jacob decides to go in there. He decides to explore what's inside. He goes inside. There's like a little like round sort of entrance, and he comes back out, and they've swapped bodies, swapped bodies. So Jacob is now inside Danny's body and vice versa. So it's one of those. And that's why I think the setup at the beginning with them really being very different kind of characters is important. So we've seen that Jacob is the more sensitive, shy one, who also has an artistic side. But that setup is important because of what then happens. And they kind of swap back, but then they agree, well, why don't we just try this for one day where we'll swap lives essentially, so we'll go and live like the other person's lives. And they agreed to do it as like just a fun little experiment. But of course this raises certain issues along the way, raises kind of problems and dilemmas. And yeah, it's obviously an interesting way for them to like see the other person's lives, because they do live quite very different lives, and we see contrasts and problems. So this is, I think, one of those classic like Twilight Zone type feeling episodes where it really gets into like the moral dilemmas and really gets its like fingers into this kind of concept, a what if type thing, and what can happen. And it does a good job. It plays with the characters very nicely and their different kind of like issues and like complex lives. I mean, I like both actors. I thought the actor playing Danny was the better out of the two. He sort of felt more natural. I thought the Jacob actor was a little bit more kind of bland, and maybe, I don't know if bland is the right word. They were obviously going for something more awkward and like just withdrawn. But actually it does work quite well. He's very kind of like monotone, but that does sort of work. It's a very muted type performance and character. And so I think it works. I'm not too sure if the actor was the best or not, but I think the casting does work for that reason. And it, as I said, it does a really good job of exploring this, and it purposely follows Jacob as Danny more than it does the other way around, because he's kind of the one who's the more unsure of himself, the less confidence. And there's some nice little touches because he goes home at one point to Danny's house, and it turns out Danny has a sister who's like a mute, so they have to sign to her. So there's an awkward bit where he's in the shower and he doesn't know sign language because it's obviously not his sister, so he has to kind of just tell her to kind of get out, like quite rudely, because he doesn't know. But one of the telling scenes is that he goes to paint the barn, which apparently he does every day. That being Danny. So it's getting into his like regular life and the fact that he has like this daily routine which he is like expected to get to, just keep to. So it's like this. It paints this picture of like this just like mundane, everyday, like small town life where there's almost a lack of freedom and a claustrophobia to it, where you're just like very restricted and you have a lack of options. And I think this is what this opens up, and Danny, like living life through Jacob's eyes, actually recognizes this. He sees that maybe Danny doesn't. I think I said it the wrong way around there. I'm going to do this probably a lot if I talk about this for a long time, but he realizes that Danny maybe doesn't have it quite so sweet. The fact that there's a lot of pressure piled on him because of who his grandfather is, and I think because he's either not the smartest, or maybe he hasn't quite applied himself at school, and so it means he's going to struggle to have many like future like academic options. So I think that is why he's being pushed more and more towards just the loop. And yes, so it's sort of a way for Jacob maybe to realise that Danny's life maybe isn't so great after all. But it opens up the fact that both of them have different issues, just in a different kinds of pressures, I guess. So yeah, one of the big scenes is that the girl who we've seen Danny flirting with before, like approaches him when he's painting, because he's painting like this barn, which is where like the local like bands go to like play music and rehearse. So she invites him inside because she kind of knows people there, but it's it's kind of them hooking up really. So she kisses him out of the blue, and obviously because this is really Jacob, he's like not sure how to act. So I think we're meant to assume then it's maybe his first time kissing a girl, but it's also a really awkward scene because obviously it's really Jacob inside Danny's body. So it's a great little scene because it manages to be both tender and quite sweet, as well as being awkward and quite creepy. It makes you sort of think about that because it's almost like he's violating her by going through with it. Because at one point, like she puts his hand on her breast, which is like really really awkward to watch because this isn't Danny. But yeah, it's one of the key scenes because it's him kind of experiencing that for the first time, but in the body of someone else. And I think it's also quite ironic because he obviously likes the other girl. I think her name's May. But yeah, I guess because he's like has these these awkward like moments with girls, I think he's kind of obviously seduced by the moment, the fact that a pretty girl is kissing him. And so there's various things they do, but they meet up the next day at school and discuss their lives, like the other person's lives. Um, and yeah, I think it does kind of like give you the sense of the fact then there is something to obviously do well at school and applying yourself and having these options like Danny actually has. So he potentially, is going to go to like university and escape this small like town that he grew up with and has that option. Whereas, Jacob seems quite resigned to life at the loop and just being a clog in this big machine. So I think it shows that there is kind of a freedom to education and stuff, but obviously there can be problems with that way of life as well, and we see them, they both have complicated lives. But I think it was quite interesting the fact that they turned things around and actually showed that Danny, his life isn't so great, then actually maybe he's masking an insecurity. But it's interesting because early in the episode he makes this comment about, because the girl like Lauren or something who's the one who's like he's into and she's into him, he's kind of like putting her down a little bit, saying no, she's not that great, and it doesn't really matter because I'm going to the loop in November and I can leave like this dead end town. What town behind is what he's basically saying, and that's almost like masking it, because that's putting a brave face on it and saying, yeah, I'm getting out of this town anyway, so none of these people matter. And on the other end of things, Jacob is kind of saying, why don't you like anyone? All these people like you and you don't seem to like anyone. So he is looking at it the other way and can't understand why this guy who seems to be popular just wants to sort of like throw it away in a way. So it's an interesting like contrast throughout the episode. But they obviously discuss their lives and they agreed to stay in each other's body for one more day. But I really enjoyed a lot of like the kind of moments where they're looking at like things from the other point of view. So for example, you get these like scenes because Jacob is a really good drawer and he draws like this just like really beautiful picture of May. Or he's teaching his like younger brother to draw, so his younger brother draws it, but it's obviously of this girl May who he really likes, and it's really heartwarming because it's like this one of these like really like drawn in crayon, really beautiful how he actually sees her. But then later on in the episode, Danny as Jacob, it's really confusing. He's looking at that picture and he's looking at it from the point of view of him, but it's a picture of Jacob draw and he just sees that beauty. But it's this very odd thing because he sees a chance to approach May almost on the behalf of Danny. I mean, or Jacob, sorry, of the chance that Jacob doesn't really get. Because they have this big fight and it's actually Danny who decides, no, I'm sorry, I actually want to stay like this. I want to stay in your body. And that's a pretty powerful moment because he's kind of saying, I want to escape my life. I want to escape into your world where there is more options and stuff. And they get into a big fight. And yeah, so they kind of stay in each other's body because they don't agree to swap, and there's a fight and then they're kind of like pulled apart by Jacob's father. But later in the episode, Danny as Jacob approaches May, and he gives her the picture, which like she really likes and stuff. But then he kind of feels guilty. He looks at obviously the name Jacob on the drawing, and again it's this really conflicting type of scene, because he's feeling bad because he's kind of impressing this girl who Jacob likes. But it's also this kind of sweet scene because he's kind of like, although yeah, I think it is meant to be quite selfish, because obviously at this point he doesn't want to swap back. But in any case, it's an interesting scene. But yeah, later on, what Jacob does, because he's the one who wants to swap back, actually because he likes May, so he wants to like ask her out and stuff, but as himself. So he actually goes to the woods later and goes back to the container, whatever the appropriate word is, and we don't really see what happens. Only then he goes back inside. But I'm not sure if there's a complication, because Danny didn't want to swap back, so Jacob actually injures himself and goes into a coma later. And I say Jacob, it's in Danny's body, but it's really Jacob. And it's left a bit ambiguous, but I'm pretty sure that they don't swap back before the end of the episode. One scene I do like later on is then actually then Danny like signs to the little sister, that being Danny's little sister. Jacob, as Danny signs to her, says, I'm still here, basically. So that's quite a sweet moment. But I'm pretty sure, like, the parents, the Rebecca Hall, Paul Snyder, then they kind of know then they've swapped, actually, because they actually mention about, because he decides to go to the loop at the end. Not that he really wants to, but he feels responsible for what happened and feels that he should go to the loop. And they're kind of saying, oh, that's great, you know, that your grandfather will be so proud, and you can always do this drawing thing as a hobby. So, but then there's this melancholic sort of sadness at the end, because he just says, I really miss my friend. And I think the mood of this episode really captures that, the really like sense of longing, like the melancholia, like these really long kind of broad sort of shots, and again this really kind of melodic, sort of quite unsettling piano type music, stunning music in this show. And we see the robot again at the end, the robot we saw in the last episode, and we're meant to think then that might actually be Jacob, the robot, but that of course isn't made clear. And yeah, really good episode. I thought actually this was stronger than the first one, which I liked the first one quite a bit also, but again the direction was really on point. The shots of like the woods and stuff, and the broad direction, and the framing of everything, this small town really captured, and just like the mood of like these two characters and the small town life, really on point. And hopefully things keep building from here, but really strong episode, I thought. So that's my thoughts on episode 2 of Tales of the Loop, Transpose, on Amazon Prime. If you've been watching along, then let me know your thoughts in the comments below, like and subscribe, and yeah, help me keep the content coming. But I'll see you guys with more TV reviews soon, so see you soon. Bye.